Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ugo Tramballi, Senior Advisor with the Italian Institute for the International Studies, ISPI, and columnist with Il Sole 24 Ore, which is the Italian equivalent of Financial Times. Our meeting today is a step on the way toward the Med Dialogue, the 7th International Conference of the Mediterranean. ISPI is organizing in Rome together with the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs. No more virtual this time, at last, inshallah. But for the first time in more than 12 years, this is the topic we are discussing today. For the first time in more than 12 years, an Israeli government is not led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Two from the center and two leftists. And last but not least, Bibi is still there with his political skill and his rhetoric, very popular among the Israelis. We should remember that Netanyahu's Likud won the last election 30 seats at the Knesset, and his successor, Naftali Bennett, just 6. With the new government, will the new government be able to keep time enough to make and approve the new budget and get some reform done? We have to remember it's 3 years now that Israel, the successful economic story of Israel, doesn't have a state budget, and all this, the destiny of this government is to rule for a full mandate. And the support of another Israeli party is just a temporary political episode or a sea change in the domestic landscape of Israel. Many events, especially in Jerusalem, West Bank, and in the mixed Israeli cities, prompt the foreign observers to believe the relations with the Palestinians, both Arab Israelis and the Palestinian Authority in the occupied territories, should be a priority for this country. But I do not think the question is in the agenda of this government as it was in the previous ones. And last, will the American administration find some room to push some form of diplomatic initiative? Well, we'll discuss all these issues and even more with our guests, which are Peter Lind, the head of research project of the German Institute for the International and Security Affairs, SWP, Anna Bagaini, visiting research fellow at the University of Nottingham, and Nimrod Goren, president and founder of MITVIM, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. We were supposing to have with us also Janan Bazul, which is a freelance journalist, and she works with, she writes for both Bylines and Haaretz, but unfortunately she's having some serious problem to be in touch with us. We will see during our discussion, but I'm afraid I'm not very optimistic. So anyway, just in 3, but parterre de roi, I would say. Let me start with Peter. Peter, just as a beginning, could you give us some broad pictures of the political Israeli landscape of today? Peter, please. Peter? We lost Peter also. Peter, can you hear me? Okay, here. Microphone.
Microphone is on.
Yeah.
So I give it a start. Many thanks for the invitation. And yes, I will make a couple of points regarding the new coalition, just the chances and the challenges, and basically its setup of the coalition. So, as you already mentioned, we have now a Prime Minister Bennett who kicks out after 12 years Benjamin Netanyahu, So we'll start maybe a new era, maybe a very short era, we'll see. The new government is extremely heterogeneous, with parties from the left, from the center, and from the right, and even an Arab party, Ra'am. Unlike it was claimed in many reports, it's not for the first time that an Arab-Israeli party joins the government. It's already in the 70s, there was an Arab party in the government, and in the 50s as well. But it's the first time that a coalition is dependent on the votes of an Arab-Israeli party. So this is certainly something new.
Hello. So we have some problem with the web today. Maybe it's the FSB, Putin Secret Service. I only have Anna Maria with hello. Peter. Yeah, well, let's say we have frozen Peter for a while. Anna Maria, I would like to pass the question to you. My question for you would be, Peter was saying that this is the first time that an Arab Israeli party is supporting the government. Actually, if I well remember, in 1992, Yitzhak Rabin got his majority, the parliamentary majority, because of the external support of an Arab country. That was one of the reasons why Bibi Netanyahu attacked him, and possibly one of the reasons why a Jewish extremist killed Yitzhak Rabin. But anyway, for decades anyway, the 20% of the Israeli population has been ignored by the majority of the country. Now both the alliance against Bibi and also Bibi try to have the favor, to win the favor of Mansour Abbas, the leader of one of the Arab countries. It seems to be a change, or it just it's not a change at all. It just is just politics. Please.
So let's say that this approach, this tactical approach that Bibi had regarding Ra'am and the Arab community of Israel was for sure stemmed by some considerations that had some tactical, strategical reasons. So there was an awareness that at least one seat in the Knesset could have been achieved by the Arab support. And then Benjamin Netanyahu decided to approach also this sector of the population, going, totally in contrast with the rhetoric that he has used in the previous years. So basically, the situation we have right now was mainly possible thanks to Netanyahu, because he was the one that had, let's say so, the authority to break this taboo. And so the opposition parties, the parties that are part of the government of change, were able to approach Mansour Abbas and to go on with the agreement that allowed the party to join the coalition. So for sure, we will see if this is something that is going to last in the future, but for sure this is a turning point because this is happening, and so in the future this could be used by other governments eventually. But this is very interesting that we have a national unity government with an Arab party that takes part in it. After the events of last month, so after the clashes also that not only involved Hamas, but also part of the Arab population within Israeli borders. So I think that it's something that is really valuable, especially if you look at the behavior that other Arab MKs had during the vote for the confidence of this government. So basically, we know that Ram was part of the coalition. One member of the Ram party, Saeed al-Harumi, decided to abstain. And this move was previously agreed with Mansour Abbas because Saeed al-Harumi is a representative of the Negev community, and he sustained that the demolition that are going to take place in the Negev weren't quite discussed into the negotiation of the agreement, but also another very interesting behavior was adopted by Ayman Hodeh, Ahmad Tibi, and Osama Saidi, that are other three members of the Arab parties that are into the Knesset, specifically the Arab Joint List. Basically, they waited outside of the room while the vote was taking place, and they decided to enter last minute, and they abstained because they know that the government had already received the majority of the vote necessary to receive the confidence. And otherwise, if the government would have received far way more votes than necessary, they would have voted against it. And this shows that there is something is happening, and the Arab parties are, and not only the Arab parties, but also the Arab voters inside Israel are gaining momentum, and they are assuming more importance, and they are becoming part of the main dynamics in coalition politics, and that's for sure something new. And I can say that this is something that it's hard to change from now on, both under a demographic point of view, but also especially under a social and political point of view.
Sure, thank you. Peter, let me come back to you. How is the line? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Hopefully it's better. I changed something in the connection, and hopefully it's more stable now. Sorry.
So we lost you when you were talking about Mansour, and then we lost you. So if you want to follow up on that.
Yes, happily. So what I was about to say is just some general remarks about the shape of the current government. That's what I said last, I guess, and what Maria followed up was that it's for the first time since the 70s that there is an Arab party in the government. But there's more facts to be discussed. Firstly, it is also a government with a prime minister and an alternate prime minister, with the Bennett now, and potentially rotating in 2 years it will be Lapid. It's also a government with veto blocks. The Bennett bloc, that is Tikva Hadasha and Yamina, is one block. They can veto the other block, that is the Lapid bloc. So you need to have unanimous votes on almost everything in this coalition. Moreover, of course, it is, as you already alluded to, it is a very narrow government. It has only 61 seats compared to 59 of the opposition. So enormous party discipline will be needed for each and every member, for each and every party. No one can abstain. Everyone needs to be here all the time. And this could be seen very dramatically already at the beginning of the Knesset, when Emily Muati, who had a spine infection, came with an ambulance to the Knesset and was voting while lying down, because of this new coalition, it was very clear that really every vote will be permanently needed. So let me speak about a couple of chances of this new government and a couple of challenges. I mean, the new government will face many, many challenges because it is ideologically so heterogeneous. The Knesset never saw basically a coalition like that. So they need to focus on non-ideological things, and they need to have an enormous output legitimacy in order to sustain, to bridge those ideological gaps. What can be done by the government? What are the chances? One thing is certainly the financial rebuilding after the Corona periods. And this will be certainly at the center of this government. Then there will be another non-ideological things they can focus on. Good governments, in contrast to Netanyahu, housing, developing Israel's infrastructure, strengthening labor productivity in some sectors, especially in the Haredi and in the Arab sector, and a couple of other political reforms. One thing might also be, it's not clear yet, that they try a couple of reforms in the field of religion and states. What you can find in the coalition contracts is at least, I mean, one word, maybe still at the coalition contract. So one word to the coalition contract still, you have two sets of coalition contracts. One is the framing coalition contract between Yamina and Yesh Atid, which is hierarchically higher than all other coalition contracts. And there are a couple of controversies or contradictions between those coalition contracts, and if so, always the Yamina Yesh Atid contract will be superior. And one of the fields where they contradict each other is religion and state. Some secular parties like Lieberman's Israel Beitenu want to have a strong liberalization of everything, of public driving on Shabbat, public transport on Shabbat, on kosher food, and so on and so on. But this will probably be not all supported, but there are three core features which are supported right now also by Yamina. The one is a reform of conversion, that regional rabbis can perform conversion and break the monopoly of the Haredim. The second is an investigation into the drama of Meron, where we saw last month several dozen people dying at the Haredi festival. And the third point in the third reform will be religious pluralism in the Kotel Plaza, so that reform and conservative denominations will find a place. So this can be also a shared value of this coalition if they don't decide to include the Haredim. Now, a couple of challenges. Those challenges will pertain to everything that is ideological. One thing might be if there is a restart with a war or something with Gaza again, a flare-up, they will have a huge problem with the Ra'am in its coalition. A second thing is there will be a lot of provocation from the Israeli right, not only Netanyahu, but also from the settlers. Right now, we see that there is the necessity to evacuate an illegal outpost. My estimation would be that there will be more illegal outposts which need to be evacuated in the future. So this has potential for domestic conflict within the coalition. Or even if we see a very liberal ruling by the Supreme Court, that also has potential for conflict, because especially Bennett, but also Tikva Hadasha, have an open flank to the right. And this will be used by Netanyahu and other right-wing politicians to criticize them, as they do already, to tell them Netanyahu coined Bennett already as a traitor, that it was the biggest fraud in the history of democracy, I think he called it, very much like Trump. And so on and so on. So what we will see in the upcoming months is a constant attack by Netanyahu and others from the political right on specific candidates within the right-wing coalition, because they have only one seat majority, so they will constantly try to frame something to bring up topics which brings the coalition at unease. And yeah, I'll stop here for now, and we can continue that later.
Thank you. Well, actually, the opportunities you mentioned are challenging as the challenge. I mean, but anyway, let's hope. Nimrod, how the countries of the region are reacting to this government, which is for the first time in a generation, almost a generation, they have an Israeli government without Bibi. Nimrod, microphone.
Thank you for the invitation to take part. The reactions are coming in slowly. You know, it just happened this week. So at the moment, we have official congratulations coming in to Jerusalem from the King of Morocco. We have congratulations from the UAE, from Bahrain, country who signed normalization agreement with Israel last summer. We don't have yet messages coming from Egypt, from Jordan, from the Palestinian Authority. Egyptian and Jordanian officials made it clear that these messages will come soon. There are sensitivities involved with how the public conceives the relation with Israel. Egypt had a very close relationship with Netanyahu, so that's also part of the delay. Jordan, to the contrary, had very bad relation with Netanyahu. So eventually, I think those countries respect the diplomatic, democratic process within Israel, and they will work very closely with the new government, because the new government really represents a chance to change and improve Israel's foreign policy. Yes, there are a lot of ideological differences between the government and coalition partners, but there are quite a number of urgent foreign policy goals on which the government members could agree on. Partly because Netanyahu, although he presented himself as a superstar diplomat over the last couple of years, is leaving office after leaving some things in quite a bad situation. We saw the crisis with the Palestinians, both in Jerusalem and in Gaza. We see a relation with Jordan almost at an all-time low. We see potential for the Abraham Accords that was not fulfilled this year. Netanyahu did not even make the official visit that was planned and postponed time and time again. We saw the over-reliance on Trump and the Republican Party. So there's a culmination of issues that need to be fixed, and I think the new government members acknowledge that. The new coalition has quite a number of center and left-wing politicians and leaders in foreign policy-related positions, whether it's Foreign Minister Lapid and his deputy Dan Rol, both from Yesh Atid, the centrist party, Minister of Regional Cooperation, Isawi Frej from Meretz, Minister of Diaspora Affairs from Labour Party, Nachman Shai, the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, the most important committee in the Knesset, is led by Yesh Atid, and the subcommittee on foreign relations is led by Labour, Emily Moati. So there is a real presence for the center and the left in decision-making on foreign policy issues, and that's a big change, plus the basic fact that Netanyahu, that caused quite a bit of antagonism among many of Israel's partners, and I mentioned Jordan, but you can add to the list also Turkey and France, and even the US is out of the picture, and that by itself opens a new page in Israel's foreign relations. And there are quite a number of priority issues on foreign policy in which the new government could move on. First, it's restoring the dialogue channels with the Palestinians. And yes, we know that there's big differences on ideology between coalition partners, and we cannot expect a real progress towards a two-state solution within the current political context. But there's much to do before that. The resumption of relations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority on the ministerial level. There was almost no contact whatsoever between Israeli and Palestinian ministers under the last government, and that should be fixed. Relation with the Gulf states could be taken to a new level, and we can elaborate later on that and how that could be done. Relation with Jordan could be fixed. An ambassador from Turkey and to Ankara, once again, should be put in place. A negotiation with Lebanon on the maritime border that were launched last year and got stuck could be moving forward. And most importantly, the Foreign Ministry of Israel, the chief apparatus that needs to lead diplomacy and diplomatic efforts, which was very much weakened under Netanyahu, will now be bringing back to the center stage of Israel decision-making. In the first place, you will see implication for that will probably be the relation with Israel's strongest ally, the US. I think all coalition members from the right to the left stressed in the election campaign the need to restore bipartisan support for Israel in the US, to develop good relations with the Democratic Party, to rebuild the trust, reaching out to new audiences within the US, and that's a consensus issue. It will also reflect on the Iran deal. It's not as if the right-wing parties will support the Iran deal, they will not, but they support engagement with the US on the Iran deal rather than a total rejectionist policy that Netanyahu had in the past. And finally, we could also see it play out in Israel-Europe relations. The relations were quite bad until a year ago. Gabi Ashkenazi, as the foreign minister under the outgoing government, tried to move them forward and succeeded to a certain extent. But the fact that Netanyahu was still there as prime minister, that there was a limited tenure for the foreign minister, did not enable, for example, Joseph Borrell to push forward the idea of reconvening the Israel-Europe Association Council, like something that both sides agreed upon. But there was still political consideration and limitation that with a new government, and Lapid has a very good connection with Macron, and the French will be the president of the EU starting early next year. So I think even in Israel-Europe relation, you will see something moving forward. And all of those international actors acknowledge that the Palestinian issue will not be the place where Israel will move forward with, as long as there are not steps being done that cause real damage to prospects of the two-state solution. I think the international community will be willing to give Bennett and Lapid the space to settle down and to start working together and to work cooperatively on a number of foreign policy issues.
So according to what you're saying, we should at least cultivate some hope regarding an opening of a sort of a channel of negotiation for, I wouldn't say a peace process, because I don't know which point this process is, but at least a channel, a path of a political and diplomatic negotiation.
Yeah, over the last few years, you saw a delegitimacy campaign against almost anyone talking about Israeli-Palestinian peace within Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu tried to portray the issue as not relevant anymore. Now we have ministers in the government coming from labor, coming from Meretz, people who came from Peace Now, who are activists in Peace Now, who are supportive of civil society work between Israel and Palestinian peace NGOs. It's a totally different landscape. And I think much could be done. It's not the dream government of the Israeli left, but it's so much better than what we had. And I think you'll see very positive consequences of that as long as this coalition manages to stick and work together.
Sure, thank you. Let me sort of follow up. A question for Anna, but I mean, it's a question for everybody, for all of you. Well, at the end of the day, yeah, Bibi was almost canceled the Palestinian issue, almost canceled any kind of a peace process that didn't come from Donald Trump and his family and his son-in-law. But at the end of the day, the economy was fine. The high tech was booming. Even in 10 years ago, I mean, after the crisis, the financial crisis of 2007, 2009, Israel was the only, let's say, Western country with a booming economy. Then the fight against the COVID. I mean, Bibi performed something, some very important. So my question is, why a huge number of Israelis are against him? They hate him since at the point to form such an heterogeneous alliance just to beat only him. Just the real reason is to beat him, to put him out of the pictures. I mean, why? I'll start with Anna, but if someone wants to say something, be open. The floor is open.
Thank you for the question. So I'll start saying something that maybe goes a little bit against what you just said, because some observers said that, of course, under these 12 years of Netanyahu government, Israel had plenty of economic prosperity. Also, the death casualties that comes from terror attacks or confrontations are at the historical minimum level. Also, speaking about diplomacy, was able to reach great results, like, for example, these Abraham Accords, and lastly but not least, the great vaccination campaign that Israel undertook in these last few months. But some observers said that if we look very closely to these results, we're able to achieve not just because Netanyahu did good, but if we look in an historical perspective, some of these results were possible because of some some legwork that has done in the previous years, or for example, I'm speaking about, for example, the economic results, and if we look to diplomatic achievements, like, for example, the Abraham Accord, or the decreasing of tensions at the borders, that is not totally true, also due because a general realignment of the region, of the balance of the region. So I think that in order to understand why Netanyahu was so able to polarize Israeli society, we have to look to another level, and it's a level of narrative, discourse, image, and perception. And Netanyahu is leaving office with a great score. He totally won. He was successful in reshaping many aspects of the public discourse. One main aspect, for sure, is the Palestinian issue. So he was able to put it on the background and to prove to the world that it's not true that time is against Israel. It's not true that Israel cannot thrive and prosper without having the Palestinian issue solved. And on an internal level, he was able to create a narrative for which there is left and right. Not only there is the right wing, and then there is the left. There are the leftists, the enemies. So he was able to put a label on not on the majority of Israeli society, but on a lot of segment of Israeli society, and he was able to stir the clash between two sides, and it was very able to offer this view in order to bring about his own political project. And this was possible because basically Netanyahu grew up as one of the main, let's say, characters of the Hasbara late in the day. He started as working in the embassy, in the Israeli consulate in New York back in the days, and that was his job basically, to give a different explanation of Israel, to bring to people the Hasbara. That's the term, and this what he did during these 12 years, and I think that that was the element that triggered the polarization that we see today, that triggered the opposition that we see today. So this large government that has just been born comes from this kind of it's like if the Israeli political system reached the maximum level of this kind of rhetoric and this kind of political tactic, and the government of change is possible today because basically Netanyahu ran out of allies. He was left with no partners with which to build the government, and I think that this was also due to his, personal abilities, his character, his personalities, the way he conducted politics in the last 12 years. And I think that's something that is really hard to intercept because we are not part of Israeli society. We are not there. So it's really hard to grasp entirely. So I think that this is the main point. Was the main element, the main factor that contributed to this kind of polarization and of position. Of course, it's very interesting because I think that since Netanyahu is still in the opposition, until he will be there, I think that he will be still the main, let's say, element that will provide the glue to this political coalition. Of course, there are many other issues, as Nimrod and Peter mentioned, that will contribute for this government to work or to dismantle. We'll see. But I think that Netanyahu will be very important, even and probably because he will try anything to bring down this government, as he mentioned the very same day of the vote of confidence.
Thank you.
And we'll see.
Well, just Hasbara, just for our viewer, is propaganda, and the Bibi transformed his Hasbara into reality for the people. That was the main issue of Bibi. By the way, for those who are watching us, if you want to send questions, the floor is open. Do you agree with what Anna said regarding Bibi? Short.
If I may add something to that, I agree with many things Anna said, but I would add one thing which strikes me to be of great importance, and that is Netanyahu's trial of corruption. Because we see now the ongoing crisis of 4 elections. We had almost a 5th election. And this is, in my opinion, exclusively because of the fact that Netanyahu wanted to have a right-wing coalition, or a coalition which grants him an immunity law. And he could not, in 4 election circles, get a coalition that would grant him that immunity law, because originally only the right-wing parties were ready to do so. Then the first to step out was Lieberman, and then it was like one party after another. Now we have 3 right-wing parties who are not ready to do that. If that wasn't there, Netanyahu would have been easily able to form a coalition with the center party as well. That wasn't Netanyahu's problem. But this limited Netanyahu's ability to form coalition with other parties. And therefore, he basically took Israel, the political system, for his own benefits, and threw them an election after an election after an election. And this contributed, in my opinion, heavily to the fact that the other parties, especially from the right, were fed up with Netanyahu and said, look, we need to go on with the state, we need to have a state budget, and so on and so on. So in addition to what Anna said, I would say the corruption trial had a huge impact on Netanyahu's ability, and also that maybe beyond that, it radicalized also his position on a couple of points, for example, annexation or the Supreme Court and stuff like that.
Sure, thank you. Nimrod, so we know that the American administration, the Biden administration, wants to keep as far as possible from the Middle East, especially from the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Of course, it will keep the embassy in Jerusalem. It will keep the Abraham process, if there is still a process. What the change we are watching now in the Israeli government would be enough to convince the Biden administration to try to do something concrete to restart a process of negotiation, slowly, of course, in long term, but a real process of negotiation.
So first, the change in the American position began before the change of government in Israel. When the Biden administration comes into power, yes, it's clear that the Palestinian-Israeli issue is not a top priority issue for them, but very quickly they made clear that they are adopting positions that are opposite of what Trump did. So it was opposition to the Trump plan. It was reaffirming American support for the 2-state solution. which was rebuilding the relations and the trust and the diplomatic representations of the Palestinian Authority with the US and in the US. So those were things happening very early on in the Biden administration. Then the recent escalation in Gaza also made the Americans need to actively intervene in mediating, and how they responded to that crisis made clear that they want the win for themselves. So the US was blocking, for example, statements in the United Nations Security Council to be the one leading the mediation efforts in coordination with Arab countries. And Secretary of State Blinken was giving calls almost every day to Arab counterparts to show that the Americans are adopting this multilateral approach to the Israeli-Palestinian issue in convergence with the regional actors. So I think the Americans have quite made a distance in the last few months in reaffirming their traditional American policies, in showing their ability and willingness to mediate. It's, I think, they don't need to do much more than that now on that topic, as long as the reality does not force them to. So as long as the Israeli government does not do any dramatic steps on annexation, on new settlement, on expansion, or another cycle of violence, or in Jerusalem, I think they will prefer to keep a low key and to let the government act and move on. On the Abraham Accords, I think it's very interesting because people tend to see the Abraham Accords as some kind of a personal project of Trump and Netanyahu, and I think that's totally not the case. Yes, they were the one to deliver it, but this is a process that began a long time ago, was handled very discreetly by the foreign ministry, by intelligence actors, also due to a strategic decision in the UAE. Netanyahu actually blocked things from happening during the last few months. He didn't allow any Israeli minister to go to the Gulf before he makes his first official visit there. So Foreign Minister Ashkenazi, Minister of Defense Gantz could not go when they were invited to the Gulf. That limited their ability to sign new agreements. That's all gone now. The framing of these accords is now different, also thanks to the Americans. It's not anymore a channel to bypass the Palestinians, as was presented by Netanyahu. It's something that could be linked in to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The fact that the Americans are thinking of appointing former Ambassador Daniel Shapiro from Israel, who served in Israel, to a special envoy to the normalization process. It's great news. He's very well respected by both sides on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I think the Americans will now have an important role in pushing those accords forward in a much better context than was done under Trump and Netanyahu. And they will find in the Israeli coalition partners from all over the political spectrum. Everybody supports normalization between Israel and the Gulf states and with Morocco. That's a consensus issue in a government that lacks consensus issues.
So that means that elephant mass grave of the American president is still open in Middle East. I have a question I try just to summarize the question. Let me try to summarize the question in this way. Is there a life for Likud after Bibi? I would say Anna.
That's a good question. So if we look at Likud per se, it's a party that relies its strength on the people that are inside the party, and what we witnessed with Netanyahu in the last couple of years was also the way in which Likud works. So it's very hard to find some members of the party that go astray and organize a revolt against the leader of the party. So what Gideon Sa'ar did was really, on one hand, unexpected, because Netanyahu was really good to, make people grow inside the Likud. But then at one point, you touch the ceiling, and this was happened, for example, with Lieberman, with Sa'ar, also with Bennett, even if he is not anymore a Likud member. So when you see that his partners, his allies grow too much, he starts to put some distance and try to, restrain this growth. So I think that inside the Likud, the situation is more or less the same. So there are some prominent figures, some prominent characters, but as long as Netanyahu is still in the game, I think it's rather difficult from someone to rise. Also because Netanyahu, I think he learned from his own history, so he was able to become a Likud leader, beating the so-called Likud princes. So, for example, Ariel Sharon, also Shamir, etc. So I don't think that it's possible for someone else to rise inside the Likud as long Netanyahu is in the picture. Also because the Likud itself refused to, think about a replacement for him in the last couple of elections. So. For sure, there would be a future for Likud because Likud is a very important party, as always been, and it will be for a very long period in the future. But as long as for a change of leadership, we'll see.
Thank you. A question for Peter. Which future for Netanyahu? Do you think he will slowly disappear from the political arena? Doubt, but please.
Well, it depends. In the next months, he will certainly not disappear, but he will be more vigorous than ever. You will see an active and more populist Netanyahu than we've seen him ever before. And he will do all he can to topple the government, the current government. Beyond the next 5 to 6 months, we have to see. First of all, his trial will be much faster now, since he's not prime minister anymore. He will not be convicted in the next, not convicted, he will not, the trial will still last for a couple of years because there will be a revision and so on and so on. So that is one factor. But there's another factor, or another two factors, let's say. First, Netanyahu will need money. Because the trial is incredibly expensive. I think he has, as far as I know, it costed him already several million, and the amount you can earn as a Knesset member is limited by Israeli law. So the moment his lawyers will say, look, you're not prime minister anymore, we want to see some money, he has to see where he can get money and where he can earn money. And this might be, he can easily earn money for book contracts if he goes to the US, but he probably will have to leave the Knesset for that. So that might be one potential exit of Netanyahu in the next 6, 7, 8 months, if there is no sign that, if the current government will be stable. And of course, the thing Anna alluded to, maybe there is someone in the Likud after a certain period of time when people say, look, Benjamin Netanyahu, look, Bibi, we tried now for 6, 7, 8 months. We were not successful in toppling the government, but we know we have a serious chance of getting back to the government if we have a different leader. So time might be against Netanyahu if the current government of Naftali Bennett is stable.
Sure. A question for Nimrod. Under what circumstances do you ascribe the deteriorating relationship with Turkey to Netanyahu, given the unprecedented belligerence of President Erdogan of Turkey?
So the relation between Israel and Turkey went so many ups and downs during those years of Netanyahu in prime ministership. And we remember the big crisis around the flotilla back in 2010, and the fact that the agreement between the two leaders was reached in 2016 to reconcile, and then flipped again in 2018. So there are deep differences between Israel and Turkey on issues related to the Palestinian issue, especially Jerusalem and Gaza. Those differences were there before Netanyahu, they are there with the new government. Definitely the style of rhetoric by Erdogan towards Netanyahu damaged the relations further and created a lot of disbelief within the Israeli policy elite of whether Turkey could still be some sort of an ally in Israel, but yet I think there is an acknowledgement of the strategic importance of having good or at least normal relation between Israel and Turkey, to have ambassadors in the embassies on the ground to have a strategic dialogue on regional issues like Syria, like Iran, where the two countries have shared interests, to better coordinate the relations that do exist on economy and civilian affairs. So I think that's one topic that the new government could tackle. It won't be easy because if you look at the new government, even though more centrist or leftist voices within the foreign policy apparatus are quite anti-Turkish in their rhetoric, it goes for Lapid, it definitely goes for Lieberman and others. So there's not a whole lot of advocacy for Turkey within the new Israeli government. But if it comes to restoring relations on the ambassadorial level, I think Turkey showed some signs of interest of that during the last few months. It sees how the relation between Israel and other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean consolidates and leaves Turkey out of the picture. So I think there's an interest in Turkey for that to happen. There may be an interest in Israel, an emerging interest by Israel to do so. And the fact that Netanyahu was a symbol of the bad relations in Turkey, it was a very personal issue. Once he's gone, I think it creates an opportunity to move forward. We could start by some sort of a congratulations from Turkey to the new government that will help build trust in Israel that some move towards Turkey is worthwhile.
Anyone, do you think that this new government could enlarge the number of people of Arab countries on board with the Abraham process, or what happened last month definitely not eliminated, but at least was the process was frozen?
So we heard the promises of the previous American president for what 5, 6, 7 countries that will join in the process, and that never happened. So currently we have countries that have normalized relation with Israel. As I said before, I don't think that was a personal gift to Netanyahu that will go away now. It was a strategic decision that will continue and perhaps even improve. In order to expand that to additional countries, I think there will be a need for progress towards a two-state solution with the Palestinians. The events in Gaza and Jerusalem made clear there is a strong linkage between the Palestinian issue and Israel's regional relation, despite Netanyahu trying to diminish that linkage, and countries that did not move forward within the easy context of Trump will find it more difficult to move now without anything good happening at the Palestinian side. Once there is some sort of renewed contact with the Palestinian Authority, once there is a new leadership in the Palestinian Authority, one way or another, I think this could be reevaluated because some of those Arab countries will want to intervene in Palestinian politics once there is leadership change, and then their relation with Israel perhaps will become a bit more important for them.
Well, actually, if I would be a political advisor of PA, I would suggest them to ask to join the process, because they will force the Arab countries to put in front of the issue the Palestinian future. But it requires too much imagination for Abu Mazen to do something like that. Peter, I mean, since the United States they don't make reform of the Second Amendment, they will have a mass shooting every week. And since Israel will not be able to make reforms of its electoral system, they will have an elections almost every 6 months. Maybe in this case next year, but more or less they will have elections. I always wonder why it's so difficult to make a reform of the electoral system. My guess is that it's not because of the parties. Of course, the parties are all the interest, but it's because of the Israelis. Because when they try in the 90s to make this reform, for instance, namely voting with the direct voting of the prime minister, I mean, at the end of the day, that the instability didn't change because the people voted for the prime minister, and then for the parliament, they voted as usual, according to the tribal line. So why it's so difficult to make this kind of necessary reform to the Israeli system?
Well, it depends what you mean with necessary or not necessary. One thing that is discussed right now is to limit the term of the prime minister to 8 years. And I think that might be possible to do, just not if it's not possible if it's elects Netanyahu, so that they want to block Netanyahu from running again. Besides reforming has a variety of issues. One thing could be to raise the electoral thresholds above 3.25%, so that you have fewer parties in the Knesset. But this will in all likelihood be blocked by the smaller parties who run risks not being part of the next Knesset anymore. So in a way, it's not, as you say, the parties do to a certain extent object a period of reforms. And as you also mentioned, direct elections for a prime minister were not particularly successful either. I wouldn't even say Israel has that much of a problem with its electoral system. It is running more or less smoothly. The problem of the last 4 years was, the last 2 years, 2.5 years, was an ideological problem we saw with Netanyahu. What comes beyond that, beyond the reforms, I don't know. But at the end of the day, Israel is simply a very heterogeneous society, which and representation of those very heterogeneous different groups is also something good. You know, they find a representation in the Knesset, even if it makes it sometimes more difficult to form coalitions or so. So I'm not sure what kind of reform beyond term limiting we will see.
Anna, what is your assessment of this, of the issue of reform of the Israeli political system?
I agree with what Peter said. So, I mean, I think that what we witnessed in the last couple of years was due not for you know, for a weakness of the law or because the system doesn't work per se, but I think that what the Israeli political system experienced was a stalemate that was caused by, let's say, a specific situation that was, let's use the word ideological, even if I don't think it's the best one. But I think we witnessed a stalemate in the political system that was due to a particular configuration of the political system, how parties behaved in these last 2 years is not a, within brackets, common behavior for Israeli political system. The result, for example, is this very large national unity government. So, because there was an element that was quite new for the Israeli political system and was a specific style that lead Israeli politics. And I think the parties behaved consequently, and also the Israeli electorate behaved consequently. And I think that Israel is a system, is a state, and is a political system that was based and was born on the idea of you know, of a gathering of different experiences. We have many differences between among the Jewish electorate. We have many differences among the Arab electorate. We have many differences between the two groups. So I think that coalitions are something that actually reflect really well the entire society. So I think that the system per se is not wrong. I think that has experienced some difficulties in facing this new challenging, and for sure these challenges could be addressed with new laws, such, for example, as Peter mentioned, limiting the period possible for a prime minister to stay in charge, or, for example, for an indicted prime minister to stay in charge. So yeah, for sure, these difficulties can be addressed and they can be solved.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nimrod. We reached like a Swiss watch 1 hour. We're perfectly 1 hour. I do thank you very much. I have the feeling, I have the suspicion that maybe we will have to come back to this issue of maybe before the next Israeli elections or the next discovery that this government will rule and like Britannia for centuries over the seas of the Mediterranean. Anyway, thank you very much. I do really appreciate what you said. Very interesting, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, and thank you very much to the people that were this afternoon was listening to us and watching to us. Thank you. Toda rabba, shukran.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.